Unsolved.
The Zodiac Killer Case. Phillip, Maurice, Sins. The Zodiac Killer sent a Halloween card that threatened Paul Avery from the San Francisco Chronicle.
Don't you think you're going to start looking over your shoulder once in a while now?
Oh, very definitely. As I say, I think it's an idle threat, but at the same time, I'm no fool. I'm going to be very careful. There was a conference with the police department and a discussion of possible police protection for me. It was finally decided that this, at this time at least, is unwarranted. If somebody takes a shot at me, that'll be a different case. But at this point, there's no need. We don't feel any need for protection.
Zodiac threatens writer, San Francisco. The mad killer calling himself Zodiac has sent a ghoulish Halloween card which threatens the life of a veteran crime reporter who has written of his slayings. Paul Avery of the San Francisco Chronicle Friday revealed that he had received the message from the Zodiac, who claims to have slain at least 13 persons. Police believe he has taken 5 lives. So this newspaper story in 1970, 1 year after Paul Stein's murder, was syndicated throughout the country. And one of the readers noticed a similarity between the Zodiac killings and the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside. And his name was Phil Sins, and he had lived in Riverside when Sherry Jo Bates was murdered, and he mailed a letter to Paul Avery of the San Francisco Chronicle telling him about the similarities between the Zodiac killer and the person who murdered Sherry Jo Bates. Then Paul Avery of the San Francisco Chronicle wrote a story about a possible connection to the murder of Sherry Jo Bates and the Zodiac murders in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then several other newspapers, the writers on their paper wrote about what Paul Avery wrote about the connection. And then the police determined that the Zodiac had killed Sherry Jo Bates. They compared handwriting samples from the Bates murder to the Zodiac's letters, and they determined that it was a match. Then about 4 months later, the Zodiac killer wrote the Los Angeles Times and claimed responsibility for the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. That you discovered my Riverside activity, he stated. Phil Sins was born in Lakewood, Ohio, on July 28, 1932. He had an older sister and several younger sisters. He also had a younger brother, Raymond, who was born in 1936, that served in the military. And then he had a much younger brother, Tommy, who served in the military, who was born in 1946 and served in the military during Vietnam. And Phil had several biological sons, the first being Philip Michael Sins Jr., who was born in 1963. There are a couple mistakes in this graphic that's scrolling on the screen right now. So I think at this point it's helpful to know where Phil lived. So he lived in La Habra, from 1959 until 1962. And he lived in Whittier at this address in 1963. And then he lived in Riverside from the mid-1960s until 1969 or 70. And specifically, he lived at 5838 Mitchell Avenue on October 18, 1966. Then he lived in Paris from 1970 to 1974, and then he moved to 29 Palms. And all of these places are in Southern California. None of them are in the San Francisco Bay Area. Now, Phil served in the United States Army during the Korean War and served in Korea. And according to this statement from his brother's son, Phil was a good brother before he left for the Korean War. And during this time, he saw his best friend in training camp blown up in front of him. And this gave him a psychosis. And so they took him to the hospital and gave him electroshock therapy. And then his mother, Helen, finally took him out of the hospital because she was against what was being done to him. Now, when he moved to La Habra, he got in trouble with the law numerous times for speeding, for drunk driving, for passing bad checks, and disturbing the peace. Now, on November 11th, 1963, or thereabouts, he married Lorraine Louise Hoffman, and she had been married at least 2 times previous, possibly 3 times, and she had 4 children when they got married. And so here's a photograph of her with her latest husband, the last husband before she got married to Phil. And his name was Thomas Robert Hoffman. And this photograph was taken in 1959, and it shows Lorraine and her 4 kids, Deborah, Arthur, Tommy, and James. Now here's where things start to ramp up in interest. On October 18th, 1966, in Riverside, California, Philip's firstborn son with his new wife darted out in the street and was hit by a car. Now, to give you an idea where this occurred, this is Riverside, west of downtown where RCC College is. And to the left you can see where Philip and Lorraine lived. And then south of that you can see La Sierra, where Cecilia Shepard went to high school. And then to the right, the red circle is where Sherry Jo Bates lived. And then right of that, the yellow circle is Ramona High School. And the black arrow is pointing northeast towards downtown Riverside and RCC College. Now, on July 4th, 1977, Lorraine, his wife, was shot in the stomach, and Philip was arrested on attempted murder charge and put in jail. And later, the police determined that it was self-inflicted, that Phil didn't shoot his wife, at least according to her, and he was exonerated and let go. And now, who is Tommy again? He's Phil Sinn's stepson. And where did he live in 1966? And his residence? He lived in San Rafael, just north of San Francisco. And I wasn't able to find a photograph of Phil Sims on the internet anywhere. And there's no reason to believe that he couldn't have traveled north to San Rafael during the time of the Zodiac murders. Yet, Tommy's service started on October 18, 1966, the same day his younger stepbrother was hit by the car, and it ended on August 31st, 1972. And the majority of the people in this family died young. Only Phil made it into his 80s. Most of the others died before they hit the age of 60. One final point that I want to make about this subject is that the Riverside police knew about the possible connection with the Zodiac before Paul Avery's article in the newspaper and before Phil Sins brought this to Avery's attention. This letter right here, you can see, is dated October 20th, 1969. And it's from the Riverside Police to the Napa County Police or Sheriff, and talking about the possible similar MO of the Zodiac suspect and the suspect in the Riverside case, the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. And so the Riverside Police were well aware of this when Phil Sins brought this to their attention.